CSIS 2440 is filmed before a live studio audience.
So today we're going to be talking about a little bit of dip our toe in the waters of security, a little teeny bit. I'll be the first to tell you I'm not an expert on this stuff, okay? But we're going to look at a couple things, hashing and encryption. Those are the two main things we're going to be talking about. So the first question is, what is the difference between hashing and encryption? Anybody know? Yeah, encryption it's a two-way street, right? It's you encrypt it with the intent to eventually decrypt it, right? You encrypt it to pass it off across the internet or whatever, and then the other side will decrypt it. Hashing is a one-way street. You hash it and that's it. You can't dehash. You can't, well, I shouldn't say can't, right? Anything's hackable, but it's not intended to be dehashed, right? It's meant to just make it, you do something weird to it and scramble it, and then it stays that way. We're going to look at both of those in the context of programming and databases and web forms and all this stuff, okay? Now, with MySQL, let's just start with something simple here. Go to our database here, and I'll just use the palindromes one. We already have that there. And inside the palindromes database, I'm going to add a new table. So you click right here where it says new. Give the table a name, so we're going to make a user table for users and passwords, right? We're going to have a field called ID, which will be their user ID, and we're going to click this button right here under AI, which stands for auto increment. What that'll do is every time you add a new record, it'll just automatically add a new ID. You don't have to manually put that in. We will have a username, and that'll be a variable character right there. It can be up to 50 characters long. That's what the length is right there. And the last one will be the password. And because of some hashing we're going to do, we need that password to be able to hold a lot of data, right? Yeah, so we're going to pick what's called a long text right here. That's the type we're going to use, okay? And then click Save over here in the bottom right. And now we've got a nice little table. Okay. So rather than doing this with PHP, we'll get to PHP in a minute. Let me just first show you right here in SQL, raw, you can actually encrypt a password. So I can do insert, in fact, let me do this in a text file so you can see it better. Okay, so I can go insert into user, that's the name of the table, and then we're going to put into the user field and the pass field. So user pass, we're going to put these values. The username will be Beavis, and the password will be password, because Beavis is not smart. So that's the insert command. We just paste that over here into this part, and we get it inserted, and if we look and browse, you'll see, there it is. But look at that right there. It's just, right there is a password, blatant, right in front of your face. And if you ever somehow were able to get into this table and see that, that's a problem. So you can actually hash these. And there's a function inside of MySQL that you can use. It's just called password. I got the word password here too many times, guys. But what this does, so what I've done is the function called password, I've passed in Beavis's password. So let's change this to chicken99, and that's not even the right way to spell chicken, but whatever. New user, butthead. And I'm going to encrypt his password, or not encrypt it, but hash it, okay? And so now when I run it, paste that in there, click go. It inserts it, but now when I browse, take a peek. Look at that. That's what his password is now, okay? So that's the word chicken99 hashed, okay? How does it hash it? There's a whole bunch of different algorithms out there for hashing, and we're going to look at a couple in a minute. But there's a bunch of different ones, and every so often SQL will probably change what the password hashing algorithm does. And if they do, you'll have to be aware of that, because if they change the algorithm, then it'll hash to something different, right? I don't know the last time they changed this, but this is not the most secure type of thing because of a thing called rainbow tables, which we'll talk about in a minute. But one thing that's important to know, if I hash this word, it always hashes to that right there. It will always hash to that. It's not random. It's actually an algorithm. And so every single time I try to hash that word, chicken spelled wrong with 99, it will hash to the exact same thing. So to prove that, we'll just have lizard is the user, and they're going to use the same password. We'll add it in there. And when we browse, you'll see that they have the exact same hash, okay? So think about how not really that secure that is. They know the hash algorithm. You can't really reverse engineer it, but if I just use the password function and I just have a list of known passwords, the hashing, it doesn't really matter, right? So what a rainbow table is, it's a list of known passwords, right? It's just a list of known passwords. And if there were no such thing as hashing, no such thing as encrypting it, and everything looked like record number 1 there where you can just see the password, well, it wouldn't be that hard to look at your rainbow table with a list of all these passwords and just try them out brute force, right? It wouldn't take that long either. Well, if you hashed it, okay, so when you do your brute force, just hash the password that you're trying to test, right? Because chicken 99 always hashes to that. So now in your rainbow table, you just hash it and you get that same thing that would be in the database. Not very secure, okay? So there's got to be a better way, and there definitely is, okay? We're going to get to that. But what questions do you have about that just basic idea right there? You can see why there's a risk, right? Okay. Let's look at how to do this in PHP to make it a little bit more secure. So first thing, we have our table already, and we're going to, right here, build a quick form, and it's going to take in a username, and then we're going to put that into the database. So first off, we got to build the form. We'll say add user. Okay, so we're going to add a new user to our database. So the question is, why do I have text here instead of password? What you really want is password, right? What password does, so let's just refresh this here. Yeah, and I'll tell you why I'm not doing that, but let me open this up, #2. So it puts the dots there. The other reason I'm not doing it is because on video, it autofills with my username and password, which I will blur out for the video, right? But it puts the asterisks right there, okay? The reason I'm doing text in class for 2 reasons. One, so that my usernames don't just show up on the screen there. So notice my usernames are not there anymore. And also, so when I'm typing the password, I can see what I'm typing so that I don't typo and so I can explain things as I go. So that's why I'm doing that. But normally you're absolutely correct. Use password. So that form, you guys should be able to do that in your sleep right now. This next part, you should also be able to do in your sleep. You ready? First thing we got to do is what? Check for the post to see if the post is even there, right? What's the best way to see if the post is there? See if the button's been clicked, right? And that's the submit. So we're just looking to see if that's set. Because again, the only way that can be set is if somebody actually pushed the button, right? So if is set, post, submit, okay? Because that is what I named it down here. The fact that it's a submit button, it's a coincidence. I could have just called this name equals Beavis or Bravis and then looked for it up here, right? Okay, I just want to make sure there's no confusion that that word submit is nothing to do with it being a submit button. It's just a coincidence. Okay, so submit. Make sure I get the extra parenthesis there. If that has happened, that means the button has been pushed. Now we can look in the post. Okay, so we're just going to set u is equal to post, and again, you guys should be able to do this in your sleep. We've done this a million times at this point. Password is password, right? There we go. Okay. Now those may not be set, right? So we could use a ternary operator here if we wanted to, right? We've been doing if statements the whole time, but why not use a ternary? So that would look like this: parenthesis, whoa, parenthesis. This piece is we want to check to see if it's set, right? So is set this, That's our Boolean question. And we might even want to go further and say, make sure that it's not empty, right? We could add that on there, but let's just to keep our ternary operator looking clean for the moment. So if is set, then after that, we do, what's next, the colon or the question mark? Okay, good, question mark. And if it's set, then we just want the post to be there, right? Well, user and password post. I'll fix that P in a minute on line 2. And then nothing. Or maybe false, right? Let's try that out. I think I got all the right parentheses there. Looks good. Oh, no, I missed. Look at that every time. There we go. Now I got the right parentheses. Okay. So do we understand that line of code? Ternary operators are tricky the first 1,500 times you use them. After a while, it starts to sink in. Okay. So we got the U, we got the P. Now, we just want to insert that into our database, right? Remember how to do this. Step 1, make a connection, right? So you can make the constants, but since I'm doing this all locally, I'm not going to bother making the constants and trying to make it work for remote and local, but you could do that, of course. So we're just going to say MySQL I connect, and of course our local host, our username is called root, our password for you guys is 1550, mine is more complicated, I'll go get it in a second. And then the last thing is the database name, which is palindrome, I think, with an S. So there we go. That's my connection. Okay? So we're going to write an insert, and it's going to be insert into user, and we're going to put into the user field and the password field the values U and P, right? Now this is going to be wrong for a moment. Okay, we'll come back to this. And then we're going to semicolon to close out our command, and then we're going to semicolon to close out the PHP command. So what's wrong with this right here? There's one little teeny thing. We'll start there, and we'll do the old trick, quote, dot, dot, quote, and we'll put that there, quote, dot, dot, quote, and we'll put that there. That's still a problem though. You are correct, we need to do that, but there's one more thing missing. Let's test it, okay? I'm just gonna echo that out, echo the insert statement right here. So here we go, we'll go to the live page over here, and we will refresh it to make sure it's clean. So we will go with Bob and your uncle, that's his password. Add it, and this is what it spits out. What is wrong with that query, that command? Let's try to run it, see what happens. So let's go in here, run it. You see anything weird yet? Okay, when I run it, let's watch what happens. So why did we get the error we got? Hallelujah. 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 Yes. It's a string. It needs to be in quotes. Yes. Very good. Excellent. Yes, the quote, it has to be in quotes. Right? It's a string. It has to be in quotes. The only reason I drug that out of you guys like that is because if I didn't, you wouldn't remember it. Okay? That you will run into that problem more than any other problem when you write a query in PHP. Okay? So, how do I do that here? I just put them inside the before I open and close everything, right? Right there and right there. Right? That'll put quotes around it. Now when I run this query, refresh it, and you'll see that now it gives me this with quotes around it, right? Now that will insert no problem. So if I run it in here, click go, poof, Bob's your uncle. Okay, so hopefully that sinks in a little bit. That's a common mistake that you will make if you're not careful, okay? So that little tangent aside, let's get this inserted into the database here. So typically what do? We just call our favorite function for running queries, which is called what? Good start. Query. There you go, that's it. throw in the connection and the command that we're running, and that's it. It'll run it. And then don't forget to close your connection. Okay? That will do it. So let's run it, test it, make sure everything's groovy. All right, so there we go. And user is Billy Bob. Add it. And we refresh, and there's Billy Bob, right? Perfect. But no protection, right? It's not hashed, it's yucky. Okay? Well, how do we fix that? Well, there's a function for that, right? Our famous little saying, there's a function for that. And the function's called hash. It's a PHP function called hash. So remember what I did before. I used the password function. That is a MySQL function. That has nothing to do with PHP. That works on the command line in the database. That is a completely unrelated to PHP. This new thing we're about to look at is actually a PHP function. Okay? So here we go. All we got to do is call the hash function. So we're going to set p equal to, that's p is the password from the post, right? Equal to hash, and it takes in a couple parameters. Parameter number 1 is the hashing algorithm we're going to use. The one we're going to use is called SHA-512, which stands for Secure Hashing Algorithm. 512 is the size of how big the hash is going to end up being when we're done. It's big. And then you pass in the thing that you're hashing, okay? So now P is equal to this, okay? So before we insert it, let's just echo it out again. So echo P, so we can see it. Come back here, and we're going to add Kid Rock, and we click Add User, and we're going to see that that big, long, nasty string right there is the word rock hashed, okay? SHA is a hashing algorithm, right? It's a particular algorithm that generates this hash based on what you put into it. Now, there are different ones. There used to be SHA 256 and so forth, and every so often they upgrade it and make it better. We still have the same problem though, right? If, just like the rainbow table, if I hash it and I have the known passwords, there's still an issue here, right? We'll deal with solving that in a minute, but one thing I want to point out, the word rock will always hash to that if you're using SHA-512. It will always hash to that, every time. The word rock may or may not necessarily be the only thing that will ever hash to that. It is possible for two things to hash to the exact same thing. It is possible, it's very unlikely, and as the years advance, and as technology advances over the years, I should say, they get better hashing algorithms to minimize what's called a collision, which is when two things hash to the same thing. When you guys take 2420, data structures and algorithms, you learn about what's called a hash table, which is a data structure. It has nothing to do with security, it's just a way to manage data and have very efficient algorithms. And you'll learn about how you handle hash collisions, okay? That's just a little side note that is a possible thing that can happen. Okay, so how do we fix this? How do we change this from being a hash that anybody can just, if they have a list of known passwords and they run the PHP hash function, well, they get into it. They get into the database, no problem. So what can we do to fix that? You very much can make a random string. Yeah, so what you do, this is actually called salting, okay? That's the idea here. So what you do is you literally, just like you said, make a random string that only you know, it's only in your PHP code, and again, that's called salting, and so we'll just call the variable salt, and we'll set it equal to literally some random keys, okay? I just made some random stuff there. And in fact, let's make a second salt. So we'll call that salt 2 and salt 1. So now what you can do, rather than hashing P, we will hash this. We'll say P is equal to salt 1, P, salt 2. So what I've done now is I've taken this random thing, and by the way, that should be a different random string to make it even better, okay? So what I've done is taken this random string that we just invented right now, concatenated the actual password, and then concatenated on this other random string, and then that is what I'm going to hash here. So unless you know those two random things, you can't, nothing's uncrackable, right? But if you don't know those, you can't just run a rainbow table on it, right? Okay, or you can't just have a rainbow table of it is probably a better way to say that. So now let's echo this out, refresh. And now this is not rock hashed, but it's whatever that is plus rock plus that hashed. Okay, so that's much more secure, agreed? Okay. Now there are ways where you can actually make the salt unique for each user. So every user has its own salt, right? So we'll look at how to do that in a minute. First thing I want to do is get this into the database, right? Because we need to learn how to pull it out of the database too. So all we got to do is go back to running this query here, and that will actually put it in the database. And so if I just refresh the page, it should get us into the database. That was Kid Rock we're doing, I believe. And we'll refresh. And there's, it didn't refresh the code, so let's do that again. Kid Rock. Now it should be better. No, what's going on? Oh, I'm an idiot. You see the problem? Remember, this is procedural code. It runs one line at a time. Yeah, this is all needs to be after I hash everything, right? Right? Because otherwise I'm just putting P in there right before we hashed it. There's a security hole for you. All right, so let's refresh that. That should give us what we want. Jeez. All right, here we go. There. Nice. Okay. Now, obviously, we don't want to have duplicate usernames and all that. That's a topic for another day. Okay. But now this is working. So how do I get it out to verify that they're allowed to log into our system, right? I need to get that out. So let's make another page here. We'll just call it get, like get the user or something like that. We'll just copy this page here. Okay, and down here, what we're going to say is when they submit it, we're going to say view user. So we're just going to, if they're in the database and they put the right password in, we're just going to spit out their name or something like that, right? Okay, so we can still do this. If the post is submitted, great. Get the username and password they put in, and we'll still need to connect to the database. Still have our salting, and then we'll take their password, salt it like we did, then we'll hash it. Then, instead of doing an insert here, we will just do a query that says select star from user where user equals, and let's do double quotes here so we can just stick our variables right in there. User equals user, right? And pass equals P, like that. Semicolon, semicolon, right? Then we run the query. So we're going to run that now, SQL, and we'll add it to results. Results equals that, resultes, that's the French spelling. Okay, agreed that that's what we're looking to do there? Because all we're saying is give me the user, or select everything from the user table where the user matches what they put in and the hashed up salted weird password matches the hashed up salted weird password in the database. Because we're doing the exact same encryption process here, or hashing process here, that we did when we inserted it. So this variable will be that big, long, nasty string, and it'll match with what's in the database. Okay? Say again? Oh, that was just me testing your knowledge of MySQL. Do not need that parenthesis there. Sorry about that. Nice. Okay. So then we can either display the results, right? Or we can just see if there is a result, right? So we can just do this one. If MySQL I num rows, and we pass in results. If that number exists, so if it's not 0, right? then we'll just say echo this user exists. Something simple. Else echo no such user. I should put a paragraph tag around those, but I'm not going to. Okay, let's just add a little bit of navigation here so we can navigate between both pages real quick. Okay, here we go. Let's refresh everything from scratch. Look in our database first, and we have this one. Let's delete the wonky Kid Rock ones there. So we have Kid Rock there. We will not be able to get Beavis, Butthead, Lizard, Bob, or Billy out with the code we just wrote, because none of those were encrypted with that hashing system we just set up, right? But we can get Kid Rock out. So we're on the Get User page, and we're going to go for Kid Rock, and it should say there, select from that, blah, 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 but it says user exists, right? Let's just comment out the echo there so it doesn't do that. But now let's try to get Beavis password. It will not say that it exists because we foolishly put that in there without any kind of encryption or anything. And so no such user, right? What am I echoing out here? That, don't want that either. So it says no such user, okay? If I try to do kid and not rock, rocker, no such user, okay? So you can use this hashing thing both ways, right? You can go back and forth. Well, let's make it into a function, okay? Let's get all that out of there. Let's make it into a function, and then let's improve it a little bit. Now, listen very carefully. We're about to make this into a function, okay? We're going to change it and make it better. But once you settle on what the function is, do not change it. Why? If I change literally this one thing, it doesn't work anymore. Every single password in the database will no longer work because it's going to try to compare them to this new hash, and it won't, the hash will be different, right? So we're doing it because we're in development right now. We're going to delete all the usernames and redo it. But once you've got real data, don't change your hashing function unless you go through and you rehash every password, right? Which, how could you do that? Because you don't know what the original password is. You can't do that. You have to make all the users reset their passwords, which some companies have done that kind of thing, right? And if there comes a day where this kind of thing becomes more crackable, then you'll have to do that. You have to make a better encryption and then make all your users redo their passwords, right? That's a thing that could happen. Okay, so what did I change there? I don't want to change that. Let's make this into an algorithm. Basically, all we need is this part of it for our function, right? So we shall create our includes folder like we always do. We'll just call this function stone cold hash. So let's go with that for now because I'm hilarious. All right, so what we need is the thing that they're going to pass in, right? So this is the thing to hash, right? It's not a very good variable, but that's what we're doing here. So we're just going to type in word or whatever, okay? So here's our salt, salt 1 and salt 2. And then we're going to say word equals word with the salts around it. And then we'll change that to word and word, right? And then we'll just simply return word. So that is now the hashed version with salt of whatever they passed in, right? This just makes our code a little bit cleaner. So now, right here, rather than doing all of this, I can just say P equals stone cold hash P. Does that make sense? We could hash U as well if you wanted to, and that's not a bad idea, especially when I'm going to show you some stuff about SQL injection in a little bit here. It's not a bad idea to do that, okay? But you could do that totally. Okay, so let's get this also to our get page over here, right there. We'll just change that. But now we can work on this function here before we go live in our development. Okay, so let's test it, make sure we didn't break anything. So let's add brand new user called Maynard, and tool is the password. Oh, of course. I know exactly what's wrong on this one. What is it? Yeah, it didn't include the functions, right? Yeah. Another common mistake. All right, include. Okay, so if I look in here, it probably added it twice because I refreshed it. Yeah, Maynard, right? But now it's in there, it's encrypted, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So now let's go in and try to get it. So we're on the get page now. Maynard, tool, and this user exists. So it's working. Great. Quickly, so that we are clear here, H1 is add, and in the get, we'll do H1 get, so that way we know what page we're on. Now, how can we improve this? I told you a minute ago that there's a way to make each user have its own salt. So what we'll do here is we will change this to take in a second parameter, the word you want to hash plus the user, okay? And so we're going to need to pass in two parameters here when we do that. So that's the word to hash and the user. And then over here, same thing. And now let's go make that work. So I'm going to take the user. Maybe I have like salt user 1 is equal to some random string. And I have salt user 2 is equal to some random string. And then I'll say that user is equal to salt user 1 plus user plus salt user 2. Now right now that's not going to be unique to each user yet, other than this part will be different, okay? But what if I then said user equals hash SHA 512, and then I hash the user. Okay, so now what I've done essentially is done to the user exactly what we did to the password. However, what if I make this one of these salts? Does that make sense? So whatever this is, I use that as one of my salts. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's do that. Let's go, instead of using these two, let's call this one salt 1. And then maybe we can do something like, oh, I don't know, user double, and we'll just tack on user again right there. So we're making a different string here, and then we'll make salt 2 this user double thing, right? I know I did that kind of quick, but I want to make sure you understand what's happening here, okay? So the code will pass in the password to be encrypted, or hashed, I should say. It also passes in the username. So we have two little random salts we made up here, and then we salted the user. So we surrounded the user by those two salts, and then we also put the username twice, or we could have said user and concatenate on the word Beavis or whatever we wanted to do there, right? But in this case, we just put the word user twice, and then we put those same salts around the word user twice and turn that into a variable. So now I have two variables here that are basically some sort of salted thing mixed with the user, right? Then I hash each of those. So I hash this one, which gives me that. Then I hash this one, which gives me that. Now this is the salt for the password, and this is the second salt for the password. So now I take whatever this evaluated to, tack on the password, and then whatever this evaluated to at the end. Then I take that whole freaking thing and then I hash that. Okay? It's very scrambled, and unless you know this, and you know that I'm doubling the user here, and you know that I'm hashing those things. I mean, there's like, I'm doing 10 different steps here, and unless you know that I even did those steps, you still can't crack it unless you know this, right? And you can make this bigger and messier if you wanted to, right? Let's just make it crazy. Don't forget the semicolon there. So now this is, I don't know, is this the most secure thing in the world? No, but it's really good, okay? So we can get rid of this now. But now we have a pretty solid function here. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you in the next few minutes, and again, this is not something I'm an expert at, and there are some new things that PHP has done to sort of protect against this, but there's still some potential issues, okay? And then I'm going to give you guys a video, I'll put it in the lecture notes today, of how this works on a deeper level where you can actually see somebody doing this, okay? This is totally illegal, all right? I'm doing it on my own site, so it makes it fine, right? But you do this to somebody else's site, it's illegal, no good, okay? But this is SQL injection, okay? SQL injection. So let me show you roughly what that is about. Let's go to our get page. Let's do, actually we'll do the insert page. And I'm going to echo out this insert again. Insert or echo insert. Also, for the moment, I'm going to turn off this hashing business because we're echoing the insert and I don't want it running off the screen being 8 miles long because it has all the hashing characters in it. But this will still work with the hashing characters, and I'll prove that to you. Okay, so let's just echo that out. So here we go. Go back here and add user, and we'll say howdy doody. That's not how you spell that, but whatever. Okay, so this is the command that's going to run, right? Normally this would be full of the hashed stuff, but we just took that out for a minute. Okay. Well, I could actually put something right here in this password field that would tack on another command at the very end of this. Okay? Think about this for a minute. Let's take this. I want the computer to run this. Delete from user. That'll delete everything in the user table. If I ran that command right now on the command line or in SQL, that would delete it. Okay? But all I can do is enter into the field that. Right? So if I try to say this, all it would do is make my, so if I try to just put that in the field, it would just do this, right? It would make my password that. That's not going to do anything, okay? What I want it to do is run it like this, okay? So what I can do is this. This is going to be tricky here, but watch this. In the field, I will type in duty as my name. Then I will type in a quote. Follow? Yes. Okay. Then I will type in a semicolon, or sorry, a parenthesis. Then I will type a semicolon. Then I will type delete from user. Not quite. There's one little piece missing. So what this will do is it will turn my password into that. Not quite there, because look at what's happening at the end here. All I have to do to get around that is make that a comment. See what I did there? I made a comment mark. So now what will happen is if I put this inside of here, which is what would be in the field, that right there, that command, if I run that in my database, it will insert howdy doody and then it will delete the entire table. Do you see why that would work? Looking at the syntax highlighting, you see it? That's totally legitimate. So if I put that, now let me turn off the running of it. Let's look in the code here and index. Let's not run it. Okay, we don't want to do that. But now if I go to the add user and I put my name is going to be user is Beavis Jr. and that's my password. When I click add user, look what it did. That's what it would run, right? So let me change that from delete to just like updating something so I don't have to delete the whole table. So we'll say, well, delete from user where ID equals 1. Okay, that'll work. So put this in here and this is what it generated. Okay, let me go run that, prove to you that is a legitimate query. So I put that in there and I hit go. And Now it gives me this error, right? But check this out. I go to browse, and sure enough, ID number 1 is missing. It's gone. So that's SQL injection. I just injected SQL into the form. Now, the only way for me to do what I just did was I had to know that you were using MySQL. I had to know what your command looked like in the first place, so I knew how to tack everything onto it. Okay? If you're using Postgres or you're using SQL Server or something else, the commands are a little bit different and it may not have worked as clearly. If I don't know that you have a field called ID, or I don't know that you have a table called user, I don't know any of that. Now, I built this thing, so I do know it, but a hacker doesn't know that. However, this table right here called information schema, it has within it the information. I can find the fact that there's a user table. I can find the fact that in the user table has a user field and a pass field and an ID field. I can find that in there. So if I can figure out which system you're using, MySQL, Postgres, whatever, then I'm able to get my hands on these tables here. The computer file video I'm going to link to in the lecture notes today shows you exactly how to do that, right? To show you how dangerous this can be. All right. So a real simple way to get around this is this. We go into our function right here, and we take P here, and we're going to use a function that is a long function name. You ready? So let's just do this for the moment. I need to have U equals, and I want to have P equals, and we'll do them both at the same time. The function is called MySQLi underscore real underscore escape underscore string. And then you put in the connection to the database that you're using, which I'm going to have to move it down underneath line 10 there in a second. And then you put in the variable that you're trying to do this with. Okay? So that should be a P right there. So I'll show you what this does in just a second. Move that down there so it's after the connection. So now let's try to do the exact same thing we just did, which is right here. Copy that, change it to number 2. And we will put that, whatever here, and that right there. And we'll click add. And now, that's a mistake. That's not supposed to happen. Oh, I copied and pasted instead of moving. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay, refresh that. So now we get this. Let's take a look at this in our text editor. This is what it generates instead. Okay, so this looks fine. This is normal. Insert in values. But then when it goes to this, it escaped that quote right there. That's the quote that I added right there. It escaped it. So now it's not treating it as a closing of a string. It's treating it as a plain old quote mark, right? And so what it's done here is made this entire thing my password, right? And this is the closing quote. And this is the parenthesis, and that's the semicolon. So it made my whole thing just by escaping that one little quote there. So now this is just my password. Won't do anything, okay? That's a mild form of protection. There are other things you can do. I want you guys to do some digging and some research, though, to see how to do it. Last thing I'll tell you, just take 2 seconds. You can do similar things with HTML. You can do HTML injection. So you can put inside of a form like a JavaScript tag with some JavaScript in it. And then they'll save that, maybe like if you're doing a comment on a blog, and your comment is some JavaScript. And every time they load that page and the comment loads, it runs the JavaScript. Well, JavaScript can do some malicious things. It can redirect you to another site, another page. It can do lots of things that are pretty deadly. So there's a similar thing you can do with your stuff here. And so we'll do it up here. And you can say user equals HTML entities U, right? And it can do the same thing with P. And it does a similar thing. It doesn't escape it. What it does do you guys know what an HTML entity is? So there are, for example, this is an HTML thing, right? An HTML tag has the angle bracket, okay? There's a thing that's called an HTML entity for the angle bracket, and it's actually called &LT. If I echo this out right here, just do it. If I echo that out, it'll literally echo an angle bracket, okay? So if I just refresh page 1 here, click the submit button, and it echoed that out right there, that little angle bracket, okay? That's just plain text. It's not actually an angle bracket meant to be part of a tag. So if you apply HTML entities to your username, let's do that now. And I'll make my username script alert hello, right? This won't work because script, I might get some other errors too, but what it'll do here is it just turned that into plain text right there. And notice it also escaped the quotes there. It turned it into plain text, and it won't run as actual JavaScript because it's just plain text. If I didn't have the HTML entities applied to it, then it would view that as HTML and try to run it. Okay. Now this site isn't necessarily the one we're using here in class. Isn't necessarily quite set up so that that little script thing would run. But if I had it like on a comment or something in a blog, then it would be an issue. Okay. So HTML entities is another one. So the two of those things combined with the hashing and everything, you got a relatively secure system here. Okay. How are we feeling? Questions?